Thank you.
And we had apologies from the councillors who were at the pre-meeting who weren't able to stay because of another commitment.
Yes, that's true. Okay. Are there any urgent matters? I don't think so. Everything was in the agenda, I believe. Matters to be considered in private. Again, I don't think there are any. Has anyone any declarations of interest in any of the matters we're discussing this evening? No? In that case, let's move to the minutes of the meeting on the 24th of June. Can I ask if they are a correct record of what took place at that meeting? Or conversely, if anyone's got any questions or comments on them. Sounds like not. Membership of the meeting. We have two people who unfortunately are leaving after this meeting. That's Eliot and Arwell, and I'm sorry they're going, and I'm sure we all are. Their replacements have been appointed, and at least one of them is here or was at the pre-meeting tonight, and that's Mia, and I've forgotten her surname, and somebody Bud. Useless, aren't I? I should have written both of them down.
It's Mia Pye and Marion Budd.
But both are present at the meeting now, Margaret.
They're both here, are they? Great. Welcome to them. Right, let's move to Tamara and Gary's report. And is Charles here to talk about early years, the first few paragraphs and recommendations on that report, or is Tamara taking it?
I can do that. Margaret and Charles can jump in if there are further questions or comments from the forum. So in the autumn each year, we have consultations with schools around funding. That includes all blocks of the dedicated schools grants. So that includes early years schools and high needs. So the report sets out the consultation responses and proposes a number of decisions that we're asking the forum to take, and notes on the recommendations and proposals the local authority will be taking forward as local authority decisions. So with the early years block, the responses from the consultation are set out in the document. There's broad support for maintaining the funding formula structure and the retention of the permitted 5% of centrally retained budget. The detail of the centrally retained budget is within the document as well. The structure of the formula is a decision of the local authority, but the schools forum have to agree the centrally retained element. So the recommendation is for the schools forum to agree 5% centrally retained budget for the local authority for 21-22.
Anyone got any questions or comments on that? Can I ask that if you want to join in, you use the raised hand facility on the participants menu, which you get at the bottom of the screen. And then there's a hand to raise on the left at the bottom of the participants list. And then we will know that people want to join in even if their video isn't on. Anyway, has anyone got any comments or questions on the early years block? No, the recommendations 1 to 3 agreed then.
Yeah, okay. So the next section of the document of the report is the schools and high needs block. The consultation responses are summarised throughout the document. It's probably worth noting that there were limited consultation responses due to other pressures on schools. We did hold 2 online sessions with schools as well. So those responses are summarised within the report. The first recommendation is for the forum to consider the funding formula factors set out in Annex 2. So there have been some increases in the funding formula factors between years in line with the national funding formula set out by central government. There is a rolling in of the teachers' pay and pension grants as well for schools, and that's also reflected in those formula factors. Okay.
You raised hands.
No.
So can we accept recommendation? It'll be 5, won't it? Formula factors.
So the process for setting the funding formula for the year is throughout December and January. So the funding formula is set based on the October census. When we have the finalised census figures and finalised figures in relation to rates, etc., we'll be modelling the formula again. There may be occasions where there is pressure caused by additional rates charges, and through that process the local authority uses the minimum funding guarantee, capping on gains and prior attainment factors to manage that. So the recommendation is just to note to the forum that any changes to formula will be confirmed in the January meeting, and that will be the approach to ensuring the affordability of the funding formula. Okay. Recommendation 7 is sorry, were you coming in there? No. So recommendation 7 is, sorry, I'm getting quite a lot of feedback. Mute their mics if they're not speaking. Thank you. So recommendation 7 is for the forum to agree the minimum funding guarantee at plus 0.5%. That is the recommendation set out in the consultation document, and there was board support for that from schools. That approach will mean schools move more quickly to the national funding formula, which has been the approach taken by the local authority and schools forum in previous years. So the recommendation is for the forum to agree the minimum funding guarantee for 21-22 at plus 0.5%.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Thank you. So recommendation 8 is a proposal for the schools forum to agree the continuation of the transfer of the 0.5% high needs block from the schools block in 21-22. This amounts to approximately £1.3 million. Within the report, we set out some of the high needs funding pressures in relation to increasing demand in high needs, and the approach of the local authority in managing both supply and demand in relation to high needs. So the proposal is to agree the 0.5% transfer from the schools block to the high needs block in the next financial year.
Can we agree that transfer to the high needs block?
Yes.
Thank
Yes.
you. Thank you.
Okay.
So
recommendation, sorry, Margaret.
It's not 9 we go on to, isn't it? Growth fund.
Yeah. So recommendation 9 proposes that the forum agree the structure of the growth fund, continuing the approach taken in previous years, but increasing the growth fund rate in line with the rest of the funding formula. That will mean that the growth fund rates reflect costs to schools in terms of teachers' pay and pension grant increases, and the growth fund is largely linked to the age-weighted pupil unit. We're also proposing that any shortfall in the growth fund is funded from DSG reserves, as was agreed in the June meeting of the forum. So that's the proposal for the forum to agree the growth fund on that basis.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Fantastic. So the next recommendation, that's recommendation 10, is for maintained schools members only, so not academy members of the forum, and that's to agree the education functions for maintained schools on a line-by-line basis. That's set out in Table 9.
Does
And
anyone,
that is,
sorry, go on.
sorry, go on, Margaret.
Does anyone want to resist any of the items set out in Table 9? If not, can we take it that we are approving them line by line?
A fairly marginal variation year on year, aren't there, Tamara, really? So I would expect we could agree them all in one go, even if they are technically line by line.
Yeah, so yeah, I think that's fine if people are comfortable with that. So in terms of the consultation, schools are broadly supportive of the rate set out in the document. That's a marginal increase of from £27 to £27.50 for financial year 21-22, and that's for maintained schools members to agree.
Agreed.
Disagree?
Agreed.
In that
Yep.
case,
Agreed.
we go on to de-delegation at 11.
Yeah, so de-delegated duties are again for maintained schools only. Academies who access these services pay separately for them, so the voting's for maintained schools. There are a number of de-delegated items which the local authority do not de-delegate. Schools have not agreed to delegate, and they're set out on page 28 of 52. On page 27, you can see the responses from the consultation, and then the proposal of the local authority to include some inflation in certain lines of de-delegation. So each sector, primary and high, need to vote separately on each line of the de-delegated duties. The proposal is for contingencies to maintain the current rate at £3 per 90 per child for both primary and secondary.
That agreed? Primary and secondary, yeah.
Agreed.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
The next one, so I'm referring to Table 10, if anyone's looking at the report as we're going through. Trade union facility time. The current rate is £3.88. The proposed rate is £3.88. However, primary colleagues have indicated that they would like to consider an inflationary increase of 2.75% to reflect the increased staffing costs in relation to that service. So the proposal has been amended to reflect that rate. So it will be £3.88 plus 2.75%.
Primary colleagues agree with that?
Agreed.
Thank you. Secondary one?
So secondary have a different rate to the primary sector, £2.72. The proposal set out in the report is to maintain the current rate, £2.72. I believe the secondary rep may wish to amend the proposed rate for the future year.
Am I?
Got a hand up.
Is it okay for me to speak? Sorry, thank you. So my comment has two parts. On the one side, we would also go with a 2.75%. But on the other side, we have decided not to commit to facilities time until we have got the new code of conduct in place. So we hope to have that by the 12th of January. But so on one side, yes, we would go ahead with the 2.75%, but we're not committing to paying it yet until we've seen the code of conduct. So I would just ask whether both high school and primary schools will be part of the review, or would we only see any form of the new code of conduct when the paperwork comes out on the 5th of January, I think we said?
Yes, so the next meeting's on the 12th of January and the report's published 5 days before. The local authority will commit to sharing that review as early as possible before that for high school colleagues to consider. So we can bring back a proposal on trade union facility time. So the proposed rate for next year will include an increase of 2.75%. So that's what will come to the next meeting. Is that agreed, Rachel?
Yes, and then we will, at that point, we will indicate whether we are committed to paying that.
Yeah.
Rachel also asked whether the review includes primary trade union facilities, didn't you?
I wondered actually whether I would have assumed that both high schools and primary schools are part of it, but I wondered whether we would be part of the review. So would we have any form of consultation before the report comes out? That was my question.
We'll share the draft with you before it's finalised for publication, Rachel.
Okay.
That's satisfactory.
Could I just ask one point on that? Am I reading this right, Tamara, that if that 2.75 were implemented, the percentage, given that the projected budget is only £23,000, is that less than £1,000 difference? And is it really going to change the price of anything by reviewing that? I mean, it's obviously perfectly reasonable to do so, but I just wonder how much difference it can make either way. But perhaps I'm missing something.
I think it's important that the Code of Conduct of Trade Unions reflects the requirements that schools need going forward. And so if high school members want to come back and agree on that basis in January, I think that's fine. But yes, in terms of the financial impact, it's marginal.
Can I comment on that, Samara, please, to help? Ian and forum members, it's basically, that's from the maintained sector, but all of the academies, well, with the exception of one currently, high school. Sorry, not a good time to have a call. So, the only time I'm unmuted, back to thought process, is that the academies buy in as well, and in the high school sector, they pay at the same rate. So although it looks like a very small figure, it is significantly higher with the academies and buy-in into that amount of money. And you'll find that the primary school and the high schools pay about the same in total, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So to answer Ian's question, I mean, inflationary increases usually look very small, but if you don't put them in year by year, then after a few years you suddenly notice that you're down an awful lot. So it's advisable usually to go with inflationary increases in our budgets. Tamara.
Yeah, I'm just reading a comment in the bar. So not increasing salary, yeah. So yeah, absolutely. And so in terms of the salary increases, they do mean real terms cuts if they aren't agreed. And obviously that goes into the baseline going forward. So it doesn't just affect this year. It will affect on an ongoing basis or mean a requirement for a greater step up between years. But I think from a local authority perspective, we're comfortable coming back in January if that's the way that high schools want to go with it.
Yeah, Rachel.
Sorry, can I just be, I'm not sure that I've come across correctly, but I might have misunderstood. We are saying that I think we need to understand that we are not committing to paying any facilities time.
Yeah, I think we do understand.
I understand
that.
It's not the 2.7.5 if we pay facilities times at 2.75 is and so it's a little bit more that we're saying we're taking away.
Oh, so it's actually talking about removing the whole commitment to the figure or going with the increased figure by 2.75. Okay, I hadn't quite caught that either.
I thought so, yes.
Yep, that's a bigger decision to make, I accept.
Yeah, but I mean equally, you know, we are able to take these decisions at the January forum. and we have committed to conducting the review. And so in terms of decision making, we're comfortable coming back for high school colleagues to vote in January. I can see Arwell's got his hand up, I'm not sure if, and Jeremy.
Somebody is asking, Emma is asking, will primary schools see the proposed code of conduct as well?
Absolutely. So it will be published with the report. So that is one of the recommendations, that to note that we will be bringing that to the January meeting of the forum, and we will circulate that in advance to representatives to take a look at before it's finalised.
So, Tamara, have we coped with your satisfaction with recommendations 11 and 12? Yes, 11 and 12.
So we just need, so we're at secondary TU time, so on table 10. The next one is for primary and separately secondary to agree the increase in the rate for free school meals eligibility from 172 to 175.
Jeremy has a question or comment.
Sorry, Tamara. Just on the last point about facilities time, I mean, the makeup of the schools forum group doesn't involve class teachers. I know there's a class teachers representative here, but I'm just wondering if there is a conflict of sorts if high schools or primary schools were to decide that they were no longer going to pay facilities time at all. That would have quite a substantial impact on teachers, not just school leaders. And is there a conflict there when often teachers are, you know, it would involve facilities time with their school leader. And so if school leaders decide that they don't want to pay facilities time anymore, is there a conflict on the forum itself whereby teachers would be disadvantaged if primary and secondary colleagues decided we didn't want to pay any facilities time at all anymore?
Sorry, can I say something in response to that? I'm still a teacher. I'm slightly confused. Are you saying that we are creating a conflict of interest and that as school leaders, we're not teachers?
I'm saying that there is absolutely. I'm saying that there is a divide between being a class teacher and a school leader in terms of our interests, in terms of our ability to operate our organizations at times. And that often, and I would say predominantly, school leaders and school teachers are not in the same union. And so I would be concerned that we hold a balance of power right now that teachers as the dominant membership wouldn't necessarily agree with.
I'm sure that the secondary heads are going to take that on board and consider it when they come to look at the review and decide whether to accept, because it's clear that Jeremy is right. There could be a conflict, obviously, between a school leader and another member of staff.
Yeah. Just for clarification as well, the TU facility time contributes towards a range of unions, so non-teaching teachers and school leaders. So clearly teachers are a large proportion of that, but it contributes to a range of trade unions. Okay. Can we move on to the free? I don't think we quite got to approving or considering the free school meals dedelegation.
Agreed.
Great, thank you. Primary and secondary.
Yeah, agreed.
Agreed, yeah.
Right, and then behaviour support.
Yeah, final one is behaviour support. So a couple of years ago, secondary decided to not delegate and deal with that separately. So this is for primary colleagues only. The proposal set out in the report was to increase the current rate from £7.7 to £7.20, and that will be for primary schools. I believe that primary schools may want to consider this, take this item at the January meeting following a meeting with the local authority to discuss the future of the service.
That's what primary members want to do. John's hand is up, John Hicks.
Just to make the point, obviously, that I think has been made before, a 1.6% increase is obviously in real terms a decrease, as it's a majority staffing budget.
Yeah, so I think the decision that we would be bringing to the January forum would be to consider options around the increase to include the 2.75%, as we have considered with the trade union facility time. So that the meeting with primary representatives will take place prior to the January schools forum. So are we agreeing to defer that decision and note, sorry, the light's just gone off, note the John's comment on the real terms cut, should that be lower than 2.75%?
Dave?
I was just going to point out, while agreeing with John, that obviously a large part is to do with staffing costs. I don't think the comparison Tamara just made with trade union facilities is correct, because for the last 4 or 5 years, the trade union facility hasn't had any percentage increase at all, even though it's entirely staffing costs. So it's actually been cut year on year on year on year. And the behaviour service has had increases year on year. So it's not a fair comparison to make there between the two.
Thanks, Dave. Are we taking primary behaviour, deferring that to the January meeting?
Agreed? Yeah.
Yeah.
Nobody's saying not, so yes.
Could I just clarify one point on it, just so is the issue that we believe that going from 7.07 to 720 isn't enough, or that we don't really want to change it at all, because it feels as though it probably should be a bit more than 720, shouldn't it, based on the discussion around staffing being the underlying, or am I missing something?
Belinda, I don't know if you want to.
Sorry, I couldn't find where my hand button was. I've lost it. I know where it is, but I can't see it. So, I've got it now.
You have to go in participants.
I know, I've got it. There you go, Margaret. Hands up.
Okay, yes, Belinda.
So I think it's more of, there are two things here. So one is that in principle, at the meeting that we had, I think colleagues agreed the 7.20 increase. The thing that we were questioning, because, given the low response rate for the consultation, and when the consultation came in, my understanding was that 3 people voted for that proposal and 4 people voted against it. And therefore we felt as a group that we needed a much broader discussion about the service for the following year and how it's going to meet the needs of schools. So that's my understanding of it. In principle, the 7.20 would stand for this year, but it's more about how that service is functioning and meeting the needs of primary schools, so that we can get more heads turning around saying, absolutely, yes, I want to keep that service. Does that make sense?
That's exactly what.
Well, I'm not sure whether you're talking now about 21-2 or further into the future.
So for next year, Margaret, the discussion from recollection was that we would agree in principle to the 7.20 rise, the increase. Not
to 2.75.
Correct. It's from whatever is in that table, 7.07 to 7.20. And mainly because that's what we were presented with. But going forward, we need to have a wider discussion about the service itself.
Can you also have a further discussion about whether for next year you would agree 2.75? Because as has been pointed out, 1.6% is actually a cut.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so on that basis, in principle, the proposal set out in the report is agreed, but we're not taking that decision until the January meeting. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. So that will be deferred till the next meeting. So we're now on, recommendation 12 we've already discussed, and that's the forum to ask officers to report back on the trade union facilities agreement review, and that will be at the January forum meeting.
So we've moved to centrally retained expenditure.
Yeah, centrally retained expenditure. So the Central School Services block is a discrete block within the Dedicated Schools grant. So the proposal is for the Schools Forum to agree on a line-by-line basis for the LA to retain the grant that the DfE has published that's been set aside for central functions. There is broad support for that in the consultation that's set out in the document, and Table 12 sets out the services and the line-by-line budgets. As part of this approval, there are a number of historic commitments. Those historic commitments, there's a substantial reduction between years in the grant allocation for historic commitments. Table 14 summarises the historic commitments and the services that are partially funded through that budget. And so the approval of the Central School Services block would include the historic commitments set out in Table 14.
Okay. Everybody votes on this one, don't they?
Yeah.
Do you literally need us to go through it line by line, or can we ask if there's any resistance to any of the lines in the tables?
I think perhaps if we were to take the central block before historic commitments as a block, and then take historic commitments separately, that might be.
Is that okay if no one's got any comments on Table 12? Right, we take it that we approve that then, the ones in Table 12, and then we go on to historical commitments. Table 14.
Great.
Anything else you want to tell us about it, Tamara?
So just to say, in terms of historic commitments, I've mentioned that reduces year to year. So you can see that's reduced from 1920. It's reduced by 421k by the time we get to 2021, and that will continue to reduce in future years. The national funding formula seeks to reduce those by a substantial proportion each year until those historic commitments are no longer part of the Dedicated Schools grant. So,
anybody, any comments on those? If not, can we approve them en bloc?
Agreed.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
Happy, Tamara?
That's great. So recommendation 14 sets out the teachers' pension and pay grants, which are part of the national funding formula for mainstream schools, are also part of the high needs block, and those special schools will have adjustments to their top-ups next financial year, and that's something we'll be working with schools on in the spring term prior to budget setting towards the end of February.
Okay, everyone happy?
Recommendation 15 asks the forum to note the composition of the notional SEN budget, and that's something that's published each year in part of the schools pro forma. So those.
Sorry, I missed Jeremy's hand up on 14. Jeremy.
Sorry, thank you. I was just wondering, there's talk about special schools top-ups in funding. What about mainstream schools that run ARPs? Is there going to be a top-up in funding to those places as well?
Yeah, so this is in relation purely to teachers paying pension grants. This recommendation, mainstream schools will be having previously separate grants rolled into their funding formula, and special schools, because we don't run the funding formula, this is quite specific to them. In terms of broader top-ups, at this stage there's no proposal to inflate top-ups, and that's been the position, and broadly speaking that's replicated through the special school sector as well. So that's not purely a mainstream issue. It's across the board that's been managed in that way.
So can we note that? And the composition of the notional SEN budget, can we note that as well? On the further matters, as I said at the pre-meeting, would like us to ask the council that when they set the schedule of meetings for future years, they put the November and January meetings of this forum into the first halves of those months, so that the forum can meet the requirements for DFE submissions, instead of having to change the date of the meeting to meet those requirements later on. You agree with that? Or would you rather have your diaries mucked about year after year?
We agree then.
Thank you. Thank you. And I think that concludes the discussion of your paper, doesn't it, Tamara? And thank you very much for all the work you've done on it and for coping with everybody's questions and comments. The next meeting is January the 12th, not the 25th as originally proposed. This is, as I said at the beginning, the last meeting of Arwar and Eliot. So I would like, and I'm sure you would all join me in thanking both of those members for their contributions over the years. We have appreciated them. Thank you.
Margaret, thank you.
And see you all on the 12th of January, hopefully.
Thanks, Margaret.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.